today's mindful moment. Ever get that feeling like maybe our idea of progress isn't the whole story? Like we're so proud of all our modern stuff. But what if, and I'm just saying, what if those ancient folks were actually more advanced than we give them credit for?
Interesting.
Yeah, so today we're going to use Will Durant's The Story of Civilization.
Ah, Durant, always a good choice for a deep dive.
Right. So get ready, folks, because we might be challenging some assumptions today.
It's fascinating how Durant, how he approaches the whole idea of civilization. He's not just, listing off names and dates and inventions like some kind of textbook.
No, not at all.
He really digs into those underlying forces, the stuff that truly shapes societies from the ground up, really.
It's like he's saying, okay, sure, pyramids are cool and all, but what made them possible in the first place? That kind of thing.
Exactly. And one of the most, I think, fascinating transitions he highlights is the shift from hunting to agriculture.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
Seems simple on the surface, right? But it had this ripple effect, like a domino on everything.
Totally, everything. But I'm curious about something. Do you think that's also like the starting point for inequality? I mean, you'd have some folks who are naturals at farming end up with more, and boom, suddenly everyone's not equal anymore.
That's a great point, and actually one that Durant explores in depth. As societies get more complex, so do their structures, their hierarchies.
Right, makes sense.
And he argues that while the division of labor is kind of essential for any kind of progress, it also, unfortunately, laid the groundwork for those class divisions we still grapple with today.
That's interesting.
And along with those class divisions comes inheritance, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which just further solidifies those hierarchies you were talking about.
So, wait, are we saying civilization, in trying to organize itself, actually created the very inequalities it's trying to manage? Is that what Durant's getting at?
It's a provocative idea, isn't it? And that's exactly where the need for a state, for laws, for systems of control emerges.
I guess that makes sense. Someone has to keep things from falling apart.
Right. And what Durant is showing us is that even our modern political systems, complex as they are, they have roots in these ancient social changes.
It's like those roots run deep, deeper than we realize.
Way deep. It's mind-blowing when you think about it. Something as fundamental as our legal system, the whole idea of justice and laws, can be traced back to, well, the invention of farming.
That is wild. But okay, I got to ask, what about morality? I was thinking we were going to talk about tools and inventions and stuff, but you mentioned morality. How does that fit in?
This is where Durant gets really interesting. He makes this bold claim that without a shared sense of morality, a society simply can't function.
Okay, I'm listening.
Think about it. Cooperation, trust, knowing right from wrong, those are the basic building blocks of any civilization, no matter how technologically advanced they are.
So civilization isn't just about material progress, building stuff, inventing gadgets. There's got to be this ethical foundation underneath it all.
Exactly. Durant even goes as far as to link the development of, our conscience to this whole idea.
Conscience, like our inner voice telling us what's right and wrong.
That's it. He suggests that it's not necessarily something we're born with, but that it evolves from social custom. It's shaped by the society we live in.
So all those rules and expectations and beliefs of our ancestors, they kind of get baked into our conscience.
In a way, yes. It's like morality becomes internalized.
That's fascinating. Okay, so we've got agriculture setting the stage, right? And this moral framework kind of acting as the glue that holds everything together. But what about like family life? What was that like in these ancient societies?
Well, one thing that might surprise you is how widespread polygamy was.
Polygamy, like multiple spouses, really?
Yeah, it was more the rule than the exception in many early societies. But Durant points out that it wasn't some kind of free-for-all. There were underlying reasons for it. Things like gender ratios, for example. If you had a society with way more women than men, polygamy might have been a practical solution.
Makes sense, I guess.
And economic disparities, too. A wealthier man might be able to support multiple wives and children, while a poorer man might not.
So it's not just about, wanting a bunch of wives. There were social and economic factors at play.
Exactly. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Durant dives into the whole concept of modesty, and he makes this point that its definition is totally relative to culture.
What do you mean?
Well, what might seem perfectly modest in one society could be scandalous in another. For example, he mentions the Queen of Belanda holding court, officially totally unclothed.
Well, hold on. No clothes. That's definitely not how they do things at Buckingham Palace.
Right. It just goes to show that our ideas of what's natural or proper, those things we take for granted, They're often just products of our own cultural conditioning.
This is making me rethink, like,
That's the power of Durant. He challenges our assumptions, makes us question things we never even thought to question before.
so we've got these ancient societies grappling with all these complex issues, from agriculture to morality to family structures. It's not as simple as we might imagine.
Not at all. And we haven't even touched on religion yet.
Oh, right, religion. Bring on the gods and goddesses. I'm ready for some mythology.
Well, Durant actually starts with a concept that's, well, it might surprise you. He talks about animism.
Animism. I'm not familiar with that one.
It's this idea that everything has a soul, not just people. We're talking animals, plants, even the wind and the rain. Everything's alive and connected to some kind of spirit.
Whoa. So the whole world is like brimming with spirits and energy. That's pretty different from our modern, scientific view of things.
It is. And it kind of makes you wonder if maybe we've lost touch with that sense of wonder, that sense of the sacred in the everyday.
I can see it.
Durant even compares the way a primitive mind observes the world to how a poet might see things, or even a dog reacting to, like, a piece of paper blowing in the wind.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
They all see agency and intention, like there's a purpose behind things, where we, with our scientific minds, we just see random forces.
So instead of just a gust of wind, they might see like a playful spirit at work.
Exactly. And he gives all these examples from different cultures. The ancient Greeks, for instance, personified the sky as the god Uranus, or the Irish belief in fairies, those mischievous little spirits. These beliefs shape their whole understanding of the world, the relationship with nature, everything.
It's like seeing those old myths and stories in a whole new light.
Exactly. It's a reminder that what might seem like primitive beliefs to us were actually complex and sophisticated ways of understanding the world around them. There's a lot more to them than meets the eye.
All right, so far so good, but I gotta ask, ancient religion wasn't all sunshine and fairies, right? Durant mentioned some pretty dark stuff too, like human sacrifice.
You're right. It's a stark contrast to that whimsical world of animism we were just talking about.
For sure. I mean, human sacrifice, that's chilling.
It is. And Durant points out that it wasn't just isolated to one culture. Human sacrifice pops up in all sorts of different civilizations across time and geography. He even mentions this chilling example, a hollow metal statue they found in Carolina. It was full of human remains.
Wow, that's creepy.
Right. So what would make people do something like that? Durant suggests a possible link to cannibalism.
Cannibalism.
Yeah, and the belief that gods shared human appetites. It's disturbing to think about, but it gives us a glimpse into their mindset.
So they're offering the gods what they think the gods desire, even if it's something horrific to us.
It's like a twisted form of hospitality.
Right. But it's interesting that, as Durant points out, this practice evolves over time.
Yeah.
Human sacrifice eventually gives way to animal sacrifice, and then to just symbolic offerings of like entrails and bones.
Exactly. It's like their understanding of the divine and their relationship with it was constantly evolving. Which brings us to another evolution, another big shift. Technology.
Technology. Now we're talking. This is where the ancients really lagged behind, right?
Well, not so fast. Durant dives into some incredible advancements made by ancient civilizations, and it's not just the stuff you'd expect.
Wait, really? I mean, it's easy to think of them as primitive compared to us,
Yeah.
but I guess they did invent, basic things like bronze and the wheel.
They did, but it goes way beyond that. Think about writing, for example.
Yeah, that's a big one. But they didn't have like laptops and smartphones.
No, but consider how writing developed. It started with simple pictographs, pictures representing objects, then it evolved into syllabaries, symbols representing syllables, and finally they hit upon alphabetic writing, representing individual sounds. That's a huge leap forward in communication.
Yeah, you're right. That's huge EE. It's amazing that the way we communicate today has its roots in those early systems.
And Durant highlights something else that's crucial. These innovations, these breakthroughs, they didn't just stay put, they spread.
What do you mean?
Through cultural exchange, trade routes, interactions between different peoples, it created this global network of knowledge.
It's like a prehistoric internet spreading ideas across the world.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
It's perfect. And he shares these fascinating stories about how it happened, like Captain Cook acquiring pigs in New Zealand. Guess what he used? 6-penny nails.
Seriously. Pigs for nails.
Yep. And there are travelers' accounts describing inhabitants of Dog Island who are obsessed with iron nails from ships, just simple nails.
It's amazing how something that seems so ordinary to us could be this valuable commodity in a different context.
Exactly. It's all relative, right, and constantly changing. What we consider valuable today, who knows what future generations will think of it.
True, true. So let's talk about a specific place. Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. Durant dives into Sumerian society, and their laws are, well, kind of surprising, especially the stuff about women.
It's a mixed bag, that's for sure. On the one hand, Sumerian women had some economic roles, some rights that we might not expect. They could own property, for example. There's even evidence that some women held positions of leadership.
Really? So it wasn't just a purely male-dominated world?
Not entirely. But then Durant also reveals those patriarchal constraints, the realities of the time. Things like the dowry system, where a woman's family had to pay a price for her marriage.
Oh, I see.
And the legal consequences if a woman committed adultery were much harsher than for men. And then there's this disturbing custom of drowning women who didn't want to be mothers.
Oh, that's dark.
Yeah, it's a reminder that progress isn't linear, right? Even in a society where women could own property, they could be subjected to some pretty horrific practices.
That's a lot to take in. Progress mixed with, well, not so progressive ideas.
Definitely. And Durant doesn't shy away from those complexities. He presents the good and the bad, the light and shadow of these ancient societies.
And out of this complex society, we get one of the earliest known works of literature, right? The Epic of Gilgamesh.
It's incredible. You've got writing evolving from purely practical uses, like record keeping and commerce, into these expressions of creativity, storytelling. The Epic of Gilgamesh is a landmark in human cultural development.
I've heard the name, but I'm a bit fuzzy on the details. What's the big deal with this Gilgamesh guy?
Well, it's this captivating story full of adventure, friendship. It's about this king, Gilgamesh, who goes on a quest for immortality.
Immortality, huh? Guess we humans have always been obsessed with that.
Seems so, right? And the story explores themes that are still relevant today, like the meaning of life, the fear of death, the power of friendship.
So it's not just a good yarn. It's got these deeper layers of meaning.
Exactly. And Durant even points out how the style of the writing, with all its repetition, it kind of reflects the religious origins of storytelling.
Repetition. Like they just kept saying the same things over and over.
Well, it wasn't just random. Durant suggests it added a ritualistic quality to the words. It gave them more weight, more significance, like they were sacred incantations.
I can see that. Okay, I'm sold. I'm going to have to check out this Gilgamesh epic. Now let's talk about a civilization that's always captured my imagination. Ancient Egypt. I mean, the pyramids alone are mind-blowing.
Egypt's a classic, for sure. And Durant starts by painting this vivid picture of the Nile River, the lifeblood of this incredible civilization.
The Nile, it's like the artery pumping life into the whole society, right?
Exactly. Everything revolved around the Nile. Their agriculture, their religion, their whole way of life. But Durant also acknowledges the challenges archaeologists face when trying to uncover Egyptian history.
Like what?
Well, they're constantly battling the desert sands, those relentless dunes that are always trying to reclaim everything.
Oh, yeah. I can imagine.
And then there are the Nile's own floods, which are both a blessing and a curse, bringing fertile soil, but also destroying ancient sites.
Nature giveth, and nature taketh away.
Exactly. And then you've got superstitions, local beliefs, and legends that sometimes hinder archaeological work.
Wow. Sounds like they've got their work cut out for them.
They do. But the rewards are immense. Durant takes us on a tour of those architectural marvels like Karnak and Luxor, and it's just breathtaking.
I've always wanted to visit those temples. Just seeing photos of them is awe-inspiring.
They're more than just structures. They're testaments to human ingenuity, artistic brilliance.
And a lot of back-breaking labor.
That too, unfortunately. Which brings us to the people who built those temples. Durant gives us a glimpse into the lives of ancient Egyptians, from powerful queens to, well, humble slaves.
Right. Ancient Egypt wasn't exactly known for its egalitarian society.
True. But Durant highlights the complexities. He introduces us to Queen Hatshepsut.
Hatshepsut.
Oh, she's remarkable. She ruled Egypt, and to solidify her authority, had herself depicted as a male pharaoh.
Wow, a woman pharaoh. That's pretty badass for ancient times.
It is. But then Durant pulls back the curtain a bit on the social hierarchy. The pharaoh and the aristocracy lived in opulence, but the artisans and slaves, well, their lives were a different story.
Right. A lot of hard work and not a lot of reward.
Exactly. And he uses these specific details to drive the point home. He mentions Ramses III offering, get this, 113,000 slaves to the temples.
Wow, 113,000. That's mind-boggling.
Right. And then he mentions this record, kept by a chief workman, detailing worker absences. Some of the reasons are pretty relatable. Sacrificing to the god, lazy, that kind of thing.
So they had slackers even back then.
Apparently so. It just shows that these were real people with real lives, just like us.
It humanizes them, makes them feel less like figures in a history book and more like, well, people we could relate to.
Exactly. And speaking of things that are relatable, Durant talks about their legal system. And you know what? It was surprisingly
But
advanced.
seriously, I always thought ancient legal codes were like pretty basic, an eye for an eye, that kind of thing.
There's that for sure. But he points out how sophisticated their legal framework actually was. Civil and criminal legislation, the concept of equality before the law. And he throws in these fascinating details like the oldest legal document about inheritance. You know where it is? The British Museum.
Wow. So their legal thinking was pretty advanced, even by today's standards.
It's impressive. He even mentions how they required written legal arguments instead of just like talking it out.
Oh, man. Can you imagine having to write out your entire legal defense? I'd much rather just make my case in person.
Right. But it shows a level of, well, legal sophistication that we might not expect. Of course, it wasn't all sunshine and roses. While they had this concept of justice, Durant also points out that their punishments could be pretty harsh. We're talking beatings, mutilation, exile, even death.
Yikes. So it's like their justice was tempered with a whole lot of retribution.
It was a different time, for sure. But it's interesting to see how our own notions of justice have evolved, what's acceptable and what's not. What might have been considered normal back then is totally unthinkable today.
True, true. All right, so we've got the laws, the people, but what about the big guy, the pharaoh? What was life like at the top of the Egyptian pyramid, so to speak?
It sounds exhausting, to be honest. Durant talks about the pharaoh's insane schedule and how he was also like, the Supreme Court. Talk about a demanding job description.
Yeah, no kidding. I guess being the CEO of an entire civilization takes a lot of energy.
Right, but he wasn't just ruling solo. He had a council of elders, the Saru, who advised him on important matters.
So there was some checks and balances even back then.
To an extent, yes. And then there were the priests. Man, those guys wielded some serious influence.
The priests, weren't they just like chanting and offering sacrifices?
That was part of it, but they were deeply involved in things like taxation, the whole economic system. And Durant explains how the pharaoh himself was seen as like an agent of the city god. So it wasn't just political power, it was divine authority.
Again, that blending of religion and politics. We see that pattern over and over throughout history, don't we?
We do. And the priests' control over economic resources just solidified their power even more. It's like a theocracy where the religious leaders are calling the shots.
Interesting. Okay, I'm ready for a change of pace. What about fashion? Did ancient Egyptians have any sense of style?
Oh, they did. And you know what? Some of their trends aren't that different from what we see today. Fashion, it seems, has a way of coming back around.
Really? So they weren't all just wearing togas and sandals?
Well, they had their own versions of those, for sure. But Durant talks about the evolution of clothing styles, the popularity of jewelry and ornamentation. It's like they were just as obsessed with accessorizing as we are.
So earrings, bracelets, rings, the whole 9 yards.
Absolutely. And makeup, too. They were big on cosmetics. It's amazing how something as seemingly frivolous as fashion can connect us to a civilization that existed thousands of years ago.
It's human nature, I guess. We all want to look good. Okay, let's talk about something a little more serious. Egyptian science. I know they made some advancements in astronomy and medicine, but what were they really known for?
They were amazing observers of the natural world. Durant explains how their study of the stars led to the creation of the calendar. The calendar, a system we still use today.
I never really thought about where the calendar came from, but yeah, that's a pretty big deal.
It is, and their calendar wasn't just some random collection of days. They based it on the Nile cycles. They even accounted for leap years.
Wow, pretty sophisticated for ancient times.
They were ahead of their time in many ways. And then there's their medicine. They had specialized doctors, a code of ethics. Of course, they also relied on amulets and incantations, so it was a mix of science and superstition. But they were making progress.
It's like they were pushing the boundaries of knowledge while still clinging to those traditional beliefs.
Exactly. It's a dynamic we see throughout history, this tension between innovation and tradition.
Makes sense. So I've got Egypt, Mesopotamia, all these fascinating civilizations. What's next on our ancient history tour?
Well, let's head over to Babylon and meet Hammurabi, the king who gave us one of the most famous law codes in history.
Oh, yeah, Hammurabi. I remember learning about his code in school, the whole eye for an eye thing. Pretty harsh, right?
Well, there's that for sure. But Durant highlights something interesting. Hammurabi claimed to have received his laws directly from the god Shamash. So he's using religion to legitimize his rule.
Smart move. If the gods are on your side, who's going to argue?
Exactly. It's a tactic that's been used by rulers throughout history. What's also interesting is how Hammurabi's code emphasizes justice, especially protecting the weak from being exploited by the strong.
So it's not all just about brutal punishments.
No, there's an element of fairness and order in there too. And speaking of order, Durant gives us a picture of daily life in ancient Babylon. It was a bustling society with all kinds of occupations and activities: hunting, agriculture, industry, commerce.
Sounds pretty lively.
It was. And Durant throws in those details that make it come alive. They used plows for agriculture, they developed irrigation systems. He even talks about the dangers of those ancient trade routes, those perilous journeys across land and sea.
It's like you're right there with them, facing those challenges, experiencing their world.
That's the beauty of Durant's writing. He transports you to those ancient times. And speaking of transportation, get this. The Babylonians had a pretty sophisticated financial system.
Really? Like what?
Well, they used gold and silver ingots as currency. They had interest rates. There were even powerful families acting like banks, lending money and financing businesses.
Whoa, ancient banking. That's pretty advanced stuff.
It is. But they weren't just about money, of course. Durant also explores their religious beliefs. They had a whole pantheon of gods, and the priests were super powerful.
So yet again, we see that connection between religion and the state.
Yep. And in Babylon, the king was seen as the agent of the city god, so his rule was divinely ordained.
Convenient.
Right. And the priests weren't just spiritual advisors. They controlled temples, they had wealth, they influenced the king. It's like a theocracy where the religious leaders hold a lot of the power.
Fascinating. So amidst all this political and religious power, we also get another version of the Epic of Gilgamesh.
We do. And it's amazing how this story traveled across cultures and took on different forms, but the core elements are still there. Gilgamesh's journey, his quest for immortality, his struggle with the meaning of life and death. It's a story that resonates across the millennia.
Okay, I got to read this epic. Now, let's switch gears a bit and talk about a civilization that wasn't exactly known for its peaceful ways. The Assyrian Empire.
Oh, yeah, the Assyrians. Durant doesn't hold back when describing their military might and their brutality. We're talking conquest, horrific punishments, the whole 9 yards.
I can already imagine. Impalement, flaying, beheading, all that fun stuff.
You got it. It was a brutal time, no doubt. But what's interesting is that even amidst all the violence and bloodshed, they had elements of cultural sophistication.
Really?
Yeah. Durant mentions Ashurbanipal, a king who was known not only for his military achievements, but also for his patronage of the arts and literature.
So even the toughest guys have a soft spot for art and culture. Who knew?
It just shows that history is full of contradictions and complexities. Nothing is ever black and white.
All right, let's move on to a civilization that's a little less bloodthirsty. What about the Phoenicians? Those guys were all about the sea, right?
They were master seafarers and traders. Durant explains how they controlled trade routes across the Mediterranean, spreading the alphabet and connecting different civilizations through commerce. They were like the ancient world's shipping magnates.
I can see that. But didn't they have some pretty intense religious beliefs, too?
They did. A whole pantheon of gods, including Baal, Astarte, and Moloch.
Moloch, isn't that the god associated with child sacrifice?
Unfortunately, yes. It's a dark side to their culture. A reminder that even the most advanced societies can have some pretty barbaric practices.
It's true. Progress isn't always a straight line, is it?
Not at all. It's full of twists and turns, and sometimes those turns lead to some pretty dark places.
Well said. Okay, let's talk about a people whose story has deeply shaped Western civilization.
Yeah.
The Jews. Durant mentions that their arrival in Egypt and their enslavement, it's shrouded in mystery.
Yeah, the details are a bit murky, but their story has resonated for centuries. Durant focuses on the figure of Moses, the Exodus, that whole narrative.
The Exodus, that's like a cornerstone of their faith.
It is. And Durant notes how it blends historical events with those supernatural elements that give it that mythic power.
It's a story of liberation, of faith, of overcoming adversity, themes that are pretty universal even today.
Exactly. And then there are the prophets, those fiery figures who really shook things up.
The prophets. I vaguely remember them from Sunday school, but remind me what they were all about.
They were like the conscience of the people. Durant highlights how they emphasized ethical conduct. They weren't afraid to criticize the wealthy and powerful. They had a vision of a more just and equitable society.
Wow, so they were like social justice warriors of ancient times.
Exactly. And their ideas had a huge impact. They shaped Jewish thought and morality, and their influence can be traced through Christianity and even into modern social movements.
I never realized how influential they were. Okay, so we got the prophets challenging the status quo. But didn't things take a turn for the worse for the Jews? What about the destruction of Jerusalem and the Babylonian captivity?
Yeah, that was a traumatic period, no doubt. Durant captures the emotional impact, the exile, the loss of their homeland, but he also highlights their resilience. Even in the face of such adversity, they found ways to hold on to their faith and their identity.
It's a story of survival, of hope, of never giving up.
Exactly, and he introduces figures like Jeremiah and Ezekiel, prophets who offered guidance and comfort during that time of exile. And then there's the second Isaiah proclaiming this message of restoration, of a return to their homeland.
It's a powerful message of hope, a light in the darkness.
It is, and it's a reminder that even when everything seems lost, there's always the possibility of renewal, of starting over, of finding hope again. Which brings us to the rise of the Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great.
Ah, Cyrus. Wasn't he known for his conquests?
He was a conqueror, for sure, but he was also known for something else: religious tolerance.
Really? That's not something you usually associate with conquerors.
I know, right? Durant highlights Cyrus's conquest of Babylon and his decision to allow the Jews to return to Jerusalem.
So he was a conqueror with a conscience?
It seems so. And Durant introduces us to Zoroastrianism, the dominant religion of Persia, with its idea of a cosmic struggle between good and evil. It's a belief system that had a huge impact on Western thought, influencing everything from Gnosticism to early Christian theology.
Wow, the ripples of history. It's incredible how these ancient beliefs and practices can still be felt today, shaping our world in ways we may not even realize.
It's all connected, and that connection becomes even more apparent as we turn our attention to the Indian subcontinent, a land of incredible diversity and spiritual exploration.
India. I've always been fascinated by Indian culture, its spirituality, its ancient traditions.
It's a rich and complex civilization, for sure, and Durant captures that beautifully. He starts by emphasizing India's diversity, its countless languages, its various cultures, its rich tapestry of spiritual traditions. It's a land that's both ancient and incredibly vibrant.
It sounds like a journey into another world, a world full of mystery and wonder.
It is. And Durant guides us through this world, introducing us to the Vedas, the sacred texts of Hinduism, and explaining how these texts have shaped Indian thought and spirituality for millennia.
The Vedas, those are like their holy scriptures, right?
Exactly. And they're full of wisdom, offering insights into the nature of reality, the self, the divine.
So they're not just religious texts, they're philosophical treatises too.
They're both. And they're incredibly complex, with different interpretations and schools of thought emerging over the centuries. But Durant does a great job of distilling the key ideas, making them accessible to the modern reader. He also doesn't shy away from the complexities of Indian society, like the caste system, a system that's both fascinating and deeply problematic.
The caste system. Yeah, that's always been a bit of a head-scratcher for me.
It's a rigid social hierarchy, with the Brahmins, the priestly caste at the top, and the Shudras, the laborers, at the bottom. It's hard to reconcile the system with India's spiritual aspirations, its emphasis on enlightenment and liberation.
It is. It's like, how can you...
It's like, how can you talk about spiritual unity and then have this rigid system that divides people into these separate categories?
Exactly. It seems contradictory.
It is. And Durant doesn't offer easy answers. He presents the complexities of Indian society with all its beauty and its contradictions and leaves us to grapple with those tensions.
Which is appropriate, I guess. Nuance is important. But, okay, let's talk about someone who challenged those very contradictions.
Yeah.
Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha.
Ah, the Buddha, a truly revolutionary figure. His story is one of radical renunciation.
Like he just walked away from everything.
Pretty much. He was born into a wealthy family, a prince, destined for a life of luxury and power. But he was troubled by the suffering he saw all around him.
So he gave it all up.
He did. Walked away from it all to seek a path to liberation, not just for himself, but for all beings. Durant explains how the Buddha rejected the caste system, rejected the authority of the Vedas, those ancient Hindu scriptures. He was looking for a more direct path to truth.
And he found it.
He did. Through meditation, contemplation, and a deep understanding of the nature of reality, he achieved enlightenment. And then he shared his insights with the world.
What were those insights? What was his message exactly?
His teachings are centered on the Four Noble Truths.
Four Noble Truths.
Yep. The truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of the end of suffering, and the truth of the path that leads to the end of suffering. It's all about understanding the nature of reality, seeing things as they truly are, and finding a way to liberate ourselves from suffering.
It sounds pretty deep.
It is, but it's not just some abstract philosophy. The Buddha offered a practical path, the Eightfold Path, which includes things like right understanding, right intention, right speech, right action, ethical conduct, mindfulness, meditation.
So it's a way of life, a way of being in the world.
Exactly. And Durant traces the spread of Buddhism, how it went from this small group of followers in India to a major world religion, influencing societies across Asia, from Southeast Asia to China, Tibet, Japan. It's incredible.
Wow, the power of one person's ideas.
It's remarkable. And Durant highlights how Buddhism adapted to different cultures, taking on different forms while retaining its core essence. It's a testament to the universality of its message.
Fascinating.
Okay.
Okay, let's dive back into the world of Hindu philosophy, those schools of thought trying to grapple with the nature of reality, the self, the universe. It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is. Hindu philosophy is this incredibly rich and diverse field with all these different schools offering their own unique perspectives. It's like a giant puzzle, with each piece offering a glimpse into the bigger picture. Durant focuses on those schools that are seeking to understand ultimate reality, like Vedanta with its concept of Brahman. Brahman is the ultimate reality, the ground of all being, the source from which everything arises and to which everything returns.
Okay, that sounds pretty abstract.
It is, but Durant uses analogies and metaphors to make these complex ideas more accessible. He also talks about the doctrine of Maya, which is the idea that the world as we perceive it, with all its forms and appearances, is actually an illusion.
An illusion. So you're saying everything we see and experience isn't real.
Not quite. It's more like it's not the ultimate reality. It's a veil over the true nature of things.
Okay, that's a mind bender.
It is, but it's a fascinating concept. And it's not about denying the world or rejecting our experiences. It's about understanding their true nature, seeing beyond the surface of things.
So it's a shift in perspective, a way of looking at the world with fresh eyes.
Exactly. And speaking of looking at the world, let's talk about Hindu epics, those grand narratives that capture the imagination and offer moral guidance.
Ah, yes, the epics. I've heard bits and pieces of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, but I haven't really delved into them.
They're epic in every sense of the word. Huge stories filled with gods and heroes, battles and romances, moral dilemmas and spiritual insights.
So they're more than just entertainment. They're like cultural textbooks.
Exactly. They're seen as guides for living, offering wisdom and insights into the human condition.
So what are they about, like the main storylines?
The Mahabharata is a tale of a dynastic struggle, a clash between good and evil, with all these complex characters and subplots. It explores themes of duty, dharma, the consequences of our actions, all that good stuff.
Sounds intense.
It is. The Ramayana is a bit more focused. It's a love story, essentially. Rama and Sita, this ideal couple, face all these trials and tribulations. It's about loyalty, devotion, the triumph of good over evil.
Sounds a bit more my speed. But both epics are considered really important in Hindu culture.
Hugely important. They're not just stories, they're like foundational texts.
Yeah.
They reflect the Hindu worldview, their understanding of the cosmos, their beliefs about morality and spirituality.
I'm adding them to my reading list.
Okay.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about Indian art, because it's so visually stunning. But I'll admit, I don't always grasp the deeper meanings behind it.
Indian art is a feast for the senses, a vibrant expression of creativity and spirituality. Durant guides us through the intricate carvings of those Hindu and Jain temples, the exquisite craftsmanship of Indian textiles, the dazzling beauty of their jewelry.
It's all so detailed, so ornate.
It is. And Durant explains how Indian art often reflects a deep appreciation for the ephemeral, the beauty of fleeting moments, the transience of life. It's like capturing those moments of beauty before they fade away.
I can see that, especially with the emphasis on nature in their art. Flowers, trees, animals, it's all there.
Exactly. Nature is constantly changing, evolving, just like life itself. And that sense of impermanence is often reflected in their art.
All right, we've explored the philosophical and artistic sides of Indian civilization. Now let's head east to China, a civilization known for its longevity, its cultural richness, and its Great Wall.
China. A civilization that's endured for millennia, a land of vastness and complexity. Durant really captures that sense of scale and grandeur. He begins by describing China's geography, its mountains and rivers, its deserts and forests. It's a land that's both challenging and incredibly fertile.
I've always been in awe of China's history, how they've managed to maintain a continuous civilization for so long.
It's remarkable, and Durant highlights the importance of agriculture in Chinese society, how the toil of the peasants, those who work the land, sustain the entire empire.
It's a reminder that even the most advanced civilizations are ultimately dependent on those who work the land, those who produce the food that sustains us.
Exactly. And Durant introduces us to this concept that's so central to Chinese culture, face. It's all about social harmony, saving appearances, avoiding shame.
Face. So it's like reputation, how you're perceived by others.
More than that, it's about maintaining social order, avoiding conflict, showing respect. It plays a role in everything from personal relationships to business dealings to politics.
It sounds like a very subtle and nuanced concept.
It is, and it takes a lifetime to master. But understanding the concept of face is key to understanding Chinese culture.
Okay, I'll try to be mindful of that. Now, let's talk about Chinese history because it's so vast and complex. Where do you even begin?
It can be overwhelming. Durant acknowledges the challenges in separating myth from reality in those early periods. It's a time of legendary emperors, sage kings, mythical creatures. It's like trying to piece together a puzzle with missing pieces.
Yeah, I can imagine. So much of it is shrouded in legend. But Durant manages to find some historical threads to follow.
He does. He introduces us to figures like Yao and Shun, who are revered as models of virtue and wisdom. And he talks about the concept of the mandate of heaven.
The mandate of heaven.
It's this idea that a ruler's right to rule is granted by heaven, by a divine power. So if the ruler is just and benevolent, the people prosper, and heaven continues to support his rule.
So it's like divine justification for their power.
Exactly. But if the ruler becomes corrupt or tyrannical, the people suffer. Natural disasters occur, and heaven withdraws its support, paving the way for a new dynasty to take over.
It's a pretty powerful way to legitimize power and also to justify rebellion if things go south.
It is, and it shaped Chinese political thought for centuries. It's a fascinating example of how ideas can have a real impact on history.
Okay, let's talk about Chinese literature.
Yeah.
Because I know it's vast and rich, and I'll admit I'm a bit intimidated to even dip my toes in.
Chinese literature is a treasure trove. Durant does a great job of highlighting the key texts and genres, those works that have shaped Chinese culture for centuries. He starts with the 5 classics, a collection of texts that cover a wide range of subjects, from history and poetry to ritual and governance.
It's like a foundation for Chinese civilization, a shared body of knowledge.
Exactly. And one of those classics that's always fascinated me is the I Ching.
Oh, the I Ching. I've heard of it, but I'm not quite sure what it's about.
It's an ancient text of divination, full of mystery and symbolism. It's been used for centuries by rulers, scholars, ordinary people, seeking guidance, understanding. You basically ask a question, throw some coins or yarrow stalks, and the I Ching provides an answer in the form of hexagrams and interpretations.
So it's like a spiritual guidebook, a way to tap into ancient wisdom.
Exactly. It's a fascinating example of how humans have tried to make sense of the world, to find meaning in the chaos, to seek guidance from a higher power.
Now, we can't talk about Chinese philosophy without talking about Confucius, right?
Confucius,
Yeah.
a towering figure in Chinese history. His teachings have shaped Chinese society for over 2,000 years. Durant captures the essence of Confucius's philosophy, his emphasis on ethics, social harmony, good governance.
So he was all about creating a virtuous and well-ordered society.
Exactly. And his ideas were rooted in the concept of lei, which encompasses ritual, propriety, social norms. It's about doing what's right, behaving appropriately, fulfilling your duties, respecting your elders.
It sounds very structured, very hierarchical.
It is. And Durant emphasizes the importance of filial piety in Confucian thought, honoring your parents, respecting authority, maintaining social order. It's a very different worldview from our own individualistic society.
It is. But there's a lot to admire in Confucian thought, that emphasis on ethics, on social responsibility.
Absolutely. And Durant shows how Confucius's teachings influenced every aspect of Chinese life, from education to politics to family life. It's a legacy that's still felt today, even as China undergoes rapid modernization.
It's remarkable how his ideas have endured.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about another big name in Chinese philosophy, Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism.
Ah, Lao Tzu. a more enigmatic figure than Confucius, shrouded in myth and legend. But his philosophy, Taoism, has had just as profound an impact on Chinese culture and beyond.
So what's Taoism all about? How does it differ from Confucianism?
Well, Taoism is more mystical, more intuitive. Durant explains how it emphasizes living in harmony with the Tao, the natural order of the universe.
The Tao, like going with the flow.
That's a good way to put it. It's about accepting what is, not forcing things, not trying to control everything.
It sounds very different from the Confucian emphasis on social order and active engagement in the world.
It is, and one of the key concepts in Taoism is wu wei, which means effortless action. It's not about being passive, it's about acting in accordance with the Tao, not forcing your will on things.
So it's like a kind of surrender, but a wise and skillful surrender.
Exactly. It's about trusting in the natural order of things, knowing when to act and when to let go.
Sounds pretty zen.
It is. And Durant contrasts Lao Tzu's philosophy with that of Confucius, highlighting their different approaches to life and governance. But he also shows how both Taoism and Confucianism have profoundly shaped Chinese culture, offering different but complementary paths to wisdom and fulfillment.
It's like two sides of the same coin, two different but equally valid perspectives on life.
Exactly. And I think both traditions have something to offer us today in our modern world that often feels out of balance, out of sync with nature.
I agree. Now let's talk about Chinese art, because it's so visually stunning. But I'll admit, I don't always understand the deeper meanings behind it.
Chinese art is a world unto itself, full of symbolism, philosophy, and spirituality. It's not just about aesthetics, it's about expressing ideas, emotions, a whole way of seeing the world.
So there's always more than meets the eye.
Always. Durant guides us through those exquisite traditions of painting, calligraphy, ceramics, jade carving. He explains how each art form reflects the values and beliefs of Chinese culture.
So like each brushstroke, each sculpted curve is telling a story.
Exactly. And Durant points out how Chinese painting isn't just about capturing the outward appearance of things, but also about expressing their inner essence, their spirit.
So it's not just about what you see, but also about what you feel.
Exactly. And that idea is also reflected in the emphasis on calligraphy as an art form, the way the brushstrokes themselves can convey meaning and emotion.
I've always found Chinese calligraphy so mesmerizing, even if I can't read it. It's like a visual dance,
Yeah.
a language of the soul.
It is. And then there's the incredible craftsmanship of Chinese ceramics, from those simple, elegant Song Dynasty pieces to the vibrant colors of Ming Dynasty vases.
Those vases are just breathtaking.
They are. And Durant explains how ceramics played this vital role in both ritual and daily life, reflecting the culture's values and aesthetic sensibilities.
It's like every object has a story to tell, a meaning beyond its practical use.
Exactly. And speaking of meaning, we can't forget about jade carving. Jade has been prized in China for millennia, not just for its beauty, but also for its symbolic meaning and spiritual significance.
I've always wondered about that, the significance of jade.
Durant explains how jade was associated with purity, virtue, immortality. And jade objects were often used in rituals as offerings to the gods or as symbols of power and status.
Like a stone imbued with meaning, a tangible representation of their beliefs and values.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that material objects can hold profound spiritual significance, can connect us to the past, can embody the values of a culture.
Okay, we've explored the philosophical and artistic sides of Chinese civilization, those deeper layers of meaning and symbolism. But what about their more practical achievements? Weren't they known for some pretty groundbreaking inventions?
Oh, absolutely. The Chinese were incredibly innovative. Durant talks about those 4 great inventions of ancient China. You ready for this? Paper, gunpowder, the compass, and printing. Each one had this transformative impact on Chinese society and eventually the world.
I mean, paper, we take it for granted, but can you imagine a world without paper?
It's mind-boggling. And then you've got gunpowder, which revolutionized warfare, the compass, which made navigation and exploration possible on a whole new scale, and printing, which allowed for the mass dissemination of knowledge and ideas.
Wow, those are game changers.
They are. And Durant also talks about other Chinese innovations, like silk production, the wheelbarrow, and even the seismograph, an instrument for detecting earthquakes.
It's amazing to think about the ingenuity of those ancient Chinese inventors. What they accomplished with technology available to them is simply incredible.
It is, and it makes you wonder, what would they have achieved if they'd had access to our modern technology?
The possibilities are mind-boggling. Okay, let's shift our focus now to ancient Japan, a civilization that's often seen as a reflection of Chinese culture, but with its own unique spirit and traditions. I've always been drawn to Japanese culture. Its aesthetic sensibility, its emphasis on harmony and balance. It's like they took inspiration from China, but then created something entirely their own.
That's a great observation. And Durant explains how Japan, despite being geographically isolated, was heavily influenced by China, especially in terms of Buddhism and Confucianism. But they weren't just passive recipients of Chinese culture. They adapted and transformed those influences, blending them with their own indigenous beliefs and practices to create something truly unique and vibrant.
So it's like a fusion cuisine of cultures, taking the best ingredients from different sources and creating something new and delicious.
I love that analogy. And Durant points out how this process of cultural exchange and adaptation played a crucial role in shaping Japanese identity. He begins by describing Japan's geography, its island archipelago separated from the mainland by the Sea of Japan.
It's a land of mountains and volcanoes, a land shaped by the forces of nature.
Exactly. And Durant explains how that geographical isolation fostered a sense of uniqueness, a distinct cultural identity that's both alluring and enigmatic.
It's like a world unto itself, a land of ancient traditions and breathtaking beauty.
And Durant delves into the early history of Japan, acknowledging the challenges in separating myth from reality. It's a time of legendary emperors, mythical heroes, stories passed down through generations.
It sounds like a historian's dream and a nightmare, trying to sift through all those myths and legends to find the historical truth.
It is a challenge. But Durant, as always, seeks to uncover the historical core beneath the layers of myth. He introduces us to key figures like Jimmu, the legendary first emperor of Japan, and Prince Shotoku, who played a pivotal role in bringing Buddhism to Japan. And he discusses the rise of the Yamato clan, which eventually unified Japan under its rule.
So it's a story of a nation coming together, forging a common identity out of diverse regional traditions.
Precisely. And Durant explains how Japan's early rulers drew inspiration from China, adopting elements of Chinese culture and governance. It's another fascinating example of cross-cultural exchange and adaptation.
It's like they were learning from their neighbors, but also forging their own path.
Exactly. And speaking of learning, let's talk about Buddhism's influence on Japanese culture. It's hard to overstate its impact.
I know Zen Buddhism originated in Japan.
Right. Well, Zen Buddhism has its roots in China, but it really flourished in Japan, taking on its own unique character. But Buddhism's influence extends far beyond Zen. Durant explains how Buddhism, with its emphasis on compassion, mindfulness, and the interconnectedness of all things, resonated deeply with the Japanese, influencing everything from art and literature to social customs and spiritual practices.
It's fascinating how Buddhism has taken root in different cultures and adapted to their specific needs and sensibilities.
It's like a seed that can grow in different soils, producing different but equally beautiful flowers. And Durant also explores the development of Shinto, Japan's indigenous religion.
Shinto, what's that all about?
Shinto is nature-based, animistic. It's about a reverence for nature spirits, a connection to the ancestors, a sense of ritual purity.
So it's quite different from Buddhism then.
Yes and no. While they have different origins and different practices, Shinto and Buddhism also share some common ground. They both emphasize a connection to nature, a respect for all beings, a sense of mindfulness and presence.
So they complement each other rather than clashing.
Exactly. And Durant explains how these two belief systems coexisted and even influenced each other, creating this uniquely Japanese blend of religious beliefs and practices.
It's like they found a way to weave those different threads together to create a harmonious tapestry.
That's a great way to put it. And Durant highlights the importance of the imperial family in Japanese society, how the emperor is seen as this symbol of unity and continuity, this link to the past and a beacon for the future.
That reverence for the emperor seems to be a very powerful force in Japanese culture, even today.
It is. And Durant explains how the emperor's role has evolved over time, from a more active ruler in earlier periods to a more symbolic figurehead in modern times. But the reverence, the respect, the sense of connection to the imperial line has remained remarkably consistent.
Okay, we can't talk about Japan without talking about the samurai, those legendary warriors.
The samurai, a class unto themselves, renowned for their martial skills, their loyalty, their code of honor. Durant explains how the samurai emerged as this powerful force in Japanese society, serving local lords and shaping the political landscape.
What about Bushido, that warrior code? What's that all about?
Bushido is the way of the warrior, a code of conduct that emphasized loyalty, honor, courage, self-sacrifice. It's a philosophy that shaped not only their behavior on the battlefield, but also their lives off the battlefield.
So it's not just about fighting skills, it's about a certain way of being in the world.
Exactly. It's a way of life, a moral code, a spiritual path. And Durant explains how the samurai's influence extended far beyond the battlefield, shaping Japanese aesthetics, their values, their emphasis on discipline, self-control, that refined sense of beauty that we associate with Japanese culture.
That's fascinating. It's like their warrior spirit infused every aspect of their culture.
Exactly, and it's a legacy that continues to resonate in Japan today. All right, let's explore the world of Japanese art. It's so diverse and refined, but I'll admit I'm not that familiar with the different styles and traditions.
I'm with you on that. I know a bit about their woodblock prints and their gardens, but there's so much more to discover.
Oh, there is. Japanese art is a treasure trove of beauty, subtlety, and profound meaning. Durant guides us through this artistic landscape, describing the exquisite traditions of painting, calligraphy, ceramics, woodblock printing, even garden design. He explains how Japanese art often reflects that deep appreciation for the ephemeral, the beauty of fleeting moments, the transience of life that we were talking about earlier.
I love that connection to nature, that awareness of the impermanence of all things.
It's central to their aesthetic sensibility. And Durant highlights the importance of calligraphy as an art form. Just like in China, the way the brushstrokes themselves can convey meaning and emotion. It's a form of meditation, a way of connecting with the present moment, a discipline that requires years of practice to master.
I've always been fascinated by those graceful, flowing brushstrokes. They seem to capture the essence of nature, the energy of life itself.
Beautifully said. And then there's the incredible craftsmanship of Japanese ceramics, from the simple elegance of tea bowls to the intricate designs of porcelain vases. Durant explains how ceramics played a vital role in Japanese ritual and daily life, reflecting their values and aesthetic sensibilities.
Those tea bowls are just works of art in themselves, aren't they?
They are. Each one is unique, handcrafted with care and precision, reflecting the artisan's skill and creativity.
What about woodblock printing? I'm thinking of those ukiyo-e prints, those vibrant images of everyday life.
Those are classics. Woodblock printing was a revolutionary technique, allowing for the mass production of images, making art more accessible to a wider audience. And ukiyo-e prints, those pictures of the floating world, captured the beauty and vibrancy of urban life in Edo-era Japan.
I love the way they depict those scenes, the geishas, the kabuki actors, the bustling city streets. It's like stepping back in time.
They're a window into another world, a glimpse of a vanished era. And those prints had a huge influence on Western art too, especially the Impressionists.
So Japanese art wasn't just influencing its own culture, it was having a global impact.
Exactly. And then there's Japanese garden design, which is truly an art form in itself. It's not just about creating pretty spaces, it's about creating these carefully designed environments that evoke certain emotions, create a sense of harmony and tranquility.
I always found Japanese gardens so peaceful, so serene. It's like stepping into another world, a world of beauty and contemplation.
They are. They're often seen as microcosms of nature, reflecting the Japanese worldview and their deep connection to the natural world.
Okay, so we've journeyed through the East, from the ancient civilizations of India and China to the unique and vibrant culture of Japan. It's been an incredible exploration, but I'm ready to shift gears a bit and head westward to the birthplace of Western civilization, ancient Greece.
Ancient Greece, a civilization that's had such a profound influence on Western thought, art, literature, politics. It's hard to imagine our world without it.
I'm excited to dive in. The myths, the philosophy, the art, it's all so captivating.
It is. And Durant brings ancient Greece to life in such a vivid and engaging way. He starts by describing its geography, the rugged mountains and those sparkling seas that shaped its culture and its history.
I've always loved the image of those whitewashed buildings perched on cliffs overlooking the Aegean Sea. It's like a postcard from paradise.
It is. And Durant explains how the Greeks, despite being unified by a common language and culture, were also fiercely independent. Each city-state, each polis vied for power and influence.
So it wasn't a unified empire like Persia or Egypt.
Not at all. It was more like a collection of competing city-states, each with its own government, its own laws, its own army. And this constant competition, while sometimes leading to conflict, also fueled incredible innovation and creativity.
So they were pushing each other to be better, to achieve more, to outdo each other in everything from art and philosophy to warfare and politics.
Exactly. And out of that competitive spirit emerged some of the greatest achievements in human history.
Okay, I'm ready to dive into Greek history. Where do we begin?
Well, Durant takes us back to the beginning, exploring the Mycenaean civilization, the Trojan War, the rise of the polis, and the development of democracy in Athens.
Democracy in Athens, that's a big one. I'm curious to learn more about how it actually worked in practice.
Athenian democracy was a remarkable experiment in self-governance. Durant explains how it emerged out of a long process of political and social evolution, this gradual shift from monarchy to aristocracy to democracy.
So it wasn't like, boom, democracy overnight.
Not at all. It was a process, a struggle, a series of reforms and revolutions.
Okay, so how did it work? What were the main institutions of Athenian democracy?
Well, Durant describes how it was structured. They had the assembly, which was open to all male citizens.
So no women allowed.
Not in ancient Athens, unfortunately. It was a democracy for citizens only, and citizenship was limited to men. They also had the Council of 500, which was responsible for day-to-day governance. And then there were the courts, which were also made up of ordinary citizens chosen by lot.
Chosen by lot, like randomly selected.
Exactly. They believed in giving everyone a chance to participate in government, not just the wealthy and powerful.
So it was a true democracy in the sense that the power resided in the people.
In theory, yes. But Durant also points out the limitations of Athenian democracy. It was a direct democracy, which meant that all citizens participated directly in decision-making. And while that sounds good in principle, it wasn't always practical or efficient. And of course, it excluded women, slaves, and foreigners. So it wasn't a perfect system by any means.
The system is perfect. But it's fascinating to see how they tried to create a system of government where the people held the power.
It was a radical experiment. And it had a profound impact on the development of Western political thought. Okay. Are you ready to dive into the world of Greek philosophy? Because that's where things get really interesting.
Bring it on. I'm ready for some Socrates, some Plato, some Aristotle.
You got it. Durant does a brilliant job of tracing the development of Greek philosophy from those pre-Socratic thinkers like Thales and Pythagoras, who were trying to understand the nature of reality, to the big three, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle.
It's amazing how those ancient Greek philosophers are still relevant today. Their ideas about ethics, about logic, about the nature of knowledge, they're still debated and discussed in universities around the world.
Their influence is undeniable, and Durant explains those key ideas in a way that's clear and engaging, making even the most complex philosophical concepts accessible.
So it's not just a bunch of jargon and head-scratching paradoxes.
Not at all. Durant makes philosophy come alive. He shows how those Greek thinkers were grappling with the same questions that we still wrestle with today. The meaning of life, the nature of reality, the pursuit of happiness, the challenge of living a good life.
It's a reminder that some things are timeless, those fundamental questions that humans have been asking since the dawn of consciousness.
Exactly. Okay, let's immerse ourselves now in the world of Greek art, because it's renowned for its beauty, its harmony, its balance.
Those Greek statues, they're just incredible, so lifelike, so perfectly proportioned.
They're masterpieces. And Durant explains how those aesthetic principles, that emphasis on harmony and balance, reflected the Greek worldview, their love of reason, their pursuit of perfection.
So their art was more than just aesthetics. It was an expression of their values, their beliefs.
Exactly. Their art was a reflection of their culture, their way of seeing the world. And Durant takes us on a tour of Greek architecture, from those majestic temples of the Acropolis to the theaters that hosted the great plays of Sophocles and Euripides.
I've always wanted to visit the Acropolis. Those temples are just breathtaking.
They are. They're monuments to human ingenuity and creativity, a testament to the enduring power of beauty. And speaking of beauty, let's talk about Greek literature.
Okay, bring on the myths and the epic poems.
You got it. Greek literature is a treasure trove. Durant guides us through this literary landscape, introducing us to the epic poems of Homer, the tragedies of Sophocles and Euripides, the comedies of Aristophanes, the histories of Herodotus and Thucydides, the philosophical dialogues of Plato. It's a feast for the mind.
I love those Greek myths, those stories of gods and heroes, monsters and mortals. They're so full of drama, adventure, and larger-than-life characters.
They are. And Durant explains how those myths weren't just entertaining stories. They were a way for the Greeks to explore their own identity, their values, their beliefs.
Yeah, so those myths were like cultural touchstones, reflecting their worldview, their understanding of the human condition.
Exactly. They were stories that taught them about life and death, love and loss, courage and wisdom. And those themes are still relevant today, aren't they?
Absolutely. Those myths are timeless. Okay, what about their plays? I vaguely remember reading some Greek tragedies in high school, all that talk about fate and hubris and tragic flaws.
Greek tragedy. Durant does a great job of explaining how it developed, from its origins in religious rituals to its flowering in the 5th century BC, with those great playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles,
What
Euripides.
were those plays about? What made them so, well, tragic?
Well, they often explored themes of fate and free will, the conflict between human desires and the limits imposed by the gods, the consequences of pride and ambition, those kinds of things.
So they were like morality tales, but with a whole lot of drama and bloodshed.
Exactly. And they raise profound questions about the human condition, about the nature of good and evil, about the meaning of suffering. And those questions are still relevant today, aren't they?
They are. We're still grappling with those same dilemmas, those same existential questions. Okay, what about Greek history? I mean, I know they had some famous historians, but I'm a bit fuzzy on the details.
Well, you've got Herodotus, who's often called the father of history. He traveled widely, collecting stories and documenting the history of the Persian Wars.
So he was like the ancient world's version of a travel writer and a journalist all rolled into one.
Exactly. And then you've got Thucydides, who was a bit more analytical in his approach. He focused on the Peloponnesian War, that
Mm.
conflict between Athens and Sparta.
Ah, the Peloponnesian War. I vaguely remember that from history class, but remind me why it was so significant.
Well, it was a clash of titans, a conflict between two of the most powerful city-states in Greece. And Thucydides wasn't just interested in recounting the events of the war, he wanted to understand its deeper causes, the political and social forces that led to this conflict.
So he was trying to find the meaning behind the events to extract some lessons from history.
Exactly. And in doing so, he laid the groundwork for the development of historical writing as a discipline.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about Alexander the Great, because that's a name that everyone knows, even if they don't know much about ancient history.
Alexander, a legendary figure, no doubt. And Durant does a great job of capturing his charisma, his ambition, his military genius.
I mean, the guy conquered most of the known world before he even turned 30. It's hard to even wrap your head around that.
It is, and Durant explains how Alexander's conquests led to the spread of Hellenistic culture, this fusion of Greek and Eastern ideas and traditions that had a profound impact on the development of Western civilization.
So it wasn't just about military conquest, it was also about cultural exchange, the fusion of different ideas and traditions.
Exactly. Alexander's empire may have been short-lived, but its impact was long-lasting. It paved the way for the rise of Rome and for the spread of Christianity, both of which drew heavily on Hellenistic culture.
Wow, so Alexander's legacy extends far beyond his military conquests.
It does. He changed the course of history, and his influence can still be felt today.
This has been an incredible journey, a whirlwind tour through ancient civilizations.
It has. We've explored the rise and fall of empires, the clash of cultures, the birth of new ideas. We've seen how those ancient societies grappled with the same challenges that we face today, how they created things of beauty and wonder, how their ideas and innovations continue to shape our world.
I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed by all this information, but also incredibly inspired.
Me too. It's a reminder of the vastness and complexity of history, the interconnectedness of cultures, the enduring legacy of human creativity.
So as we wrap up this epic journey, what are some of the key takeaways, those lessons we can learn from these old-timers as we navigate the complexities of our own modern world?
Well, I think one crucial takeaway is the importance of perspective. Durant constantly encourages us to see things from different angles, to step outside our own cultural bubbles, to try to understand the world through the eyes of those who came before us.
It's like he's saying, don't judge the past by the standards of the present. Try to understand it on its own terms.
Exactly. And that can be challenging, but it's also incredibly rewarding. It can help us to better understand our own world, our own beliefs, our own place in the grand scheme of things.
Another takeaway, and I think this one is really important, is humility. Reading Durant's work, you can't help but feel a sense of awe at the vastness of history, the incredible achievements of these ancient civilizations, and the realization that we're just one small chapter in this ongoing saga.
It's humbling, for sure. It reminds us that our own way of seeing the world is not the only way, that there's always more to learn, more to discover, more to appreciate.
And it also makes you realize that those old-timers weren't so different from us after all. They struggled with the same challenges, pursued the same dreams, and created incredible things, despite the limitations of their time.
Exactly. And that brings me to a final takeaway, which is hope. Amidst all the conflicts, tragedies, and injustices of history, Durant reveals the resilience of the human spirit, our capacity for creativity, our yearning for meaning, our potential for progress and growth. He reminds us that humans have faced seemingly insurmountable challenges throughout history and have found ways to overcome them.
It's like he's saying, don't despair. Look at what we've accomplished. Look at how far we've come. We can face the challenges of our own time with courage, wisdom, and a belief in our ability to create a better future.
Beautifully said. And I think that's a message we all need to hear.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling incredibly inspired after this deep dive into ancient civilizations. It's given me a new appreciation for the richness and complexity of history, the interconnectedness of cultures, and the enduring legacy of human creativity.
Me too. And I think Will Durant would be pleased to know that his work continues to spark curiosity, ignite imaginations, and inspire a love of learning.
So to all our listeners out there, we encourage you to continue exploring, to delve deeper into these fascinating cultures, to discover those hidden connections between the past and present, East and West, and to embrace the enduring legacy of humanity.
And if you're feeling inspired to learn more, pick up a copy of Will Durant's The Story of Civilization. It's a masterpiece of historical writing, a journey through time that will expand your mind, enrich your understanding of the world, and leave you with a renewed sense of wonder and possibility.
Thanks for joining us on this epic adventure. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a fascinating topic. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Make sure to subscribe and share this episode with your friends. We're constantly exploring new and challenging ideas, things that make you question what you think you know.
And we've included a purchase link for the book in the show notes, just for you. Keep those minds sharp and never stop questioning. Until next